Hello and welcome to a new episode of the Lowdown. Today I'm delighted to be joined by my fellow Monster man, Conor Nestor, who's currently coaching in the Cambodian Premier League. Conor, welcome to the show.
Oh, I'm delighted to be here, Conor. Thanks for inviting me.
Conor, how's all in Cambodia at the moment?
Yeah, I guess 2020 in Cambodia, we were a lot more fortunate than most countries in the world, really. That kind of COVID didn't massively affect us. It affected the country economically because there was no tourism and things like that. Obviously, were shot. But from a health perspective, we kind of flew under the radar, I guess, of COVID in a way. But that changed massively since about February this year, and we're kind of going through, I think, maybe what everyone in the rest of the world, if you like, went through last year. So we're a little bit like a year late. Now the government have done a good job of vaccinating people, and now I guess we're where everybody else is in terms of that kind of, what's the next step, and when do things get back to normal, and do they get back to normal, etc. We're just on a 2-week break from the league now. We got 10 games played, with kind of interruptions left, right, and center. But we've got 10 games played, and hopefully we'll get the league finished in time for would normally finish around end of October, early November.
And in terms, of this chapter of your life story, you're in Cambodia, far from where it all began, Conor, in the shores of the west of Ireland. Can you tell us more about that footballing upbringing?
Yeah, like I'm from FOYNES, a really small place in West Limerick, but it was a place where I was very fortunate, where kind of the generation slightly older than me, the generation slightly younger than me, were all obsessed with football, association football, soccer as we called it growing up. And I caught that bug like as early as I can remember, and just you grow up playing on the street, playing on the schoolyard, playing on the GA field when no one was looking. And yeah, it was just kind of in the blood from as early as I can remember. Just that kind of age-old story of a young boy kind of falling in love with the game a little bit, and that's where it started, and played at a reasonable level in Limerick. Played in university. I went to NUI Maynooth. Played a couple of Collingwood Cups there, and at kind of schoolboy level, I would have played up to kind of international trials at under 15s level, because I was playing on the representative team. But I kind of began to see after those trials kind of that the pathway for me, certainly as a professional footballer, probably wasn't going to be there. I was probably punching above my weight maybe at that time even, and also felt, although I had great coaches growing up, they were great coaches in the human sense, in terms of, with somebody's dad or somebody's older brother, or they weren't coaches in the, from their own educational background, if that makes sense. So from the age of 17, kind of, I became a coach and a player, and by the time I graduated from university, kind of the coaching was taken over, in terms of I didn't get into coaching immediately with an intent of making it my career, but I was very lucky. The first group of boys that I coached, that your hope is you inspire your players, but actually the way they took to me kind of inspired me, if you like, in terms of thinking, what, maybe I could give this a go. But the problem is, like, it's 2002, West Limerick. I didn't know anyone that was a professional footballer, never mind professional coach. There was no reference points, if you like. So I did a degree in English and history in NUI Maynooth, and the thinking was go and be, a secondary school teacher, and develop as a coach kind of in the background, and see if kind of the footballing industry or the sporting industry in Ireland could catch up a little bit, because there was no real industry at that time. I think the Football Association employed about 6 regional development officers around that time, and it was unheard of to for people in the League of Ireland really to be working full time. There would have been 1 or 2 clubs. So that kind of would have been the background and kind of where things started for me and how I kind of fell into coaching, if you like.
Yeah, there's a lot there to discuss, Conor. I mean, 17 years of age in 2002, that's when you first get thoughts in your mind about pursuing football as a full-time career. Of course, you say you didn't have the reference points, be they local or be they, domestically in Ireland. But nonetheless, even though it's only 2002, I'm sure, internet and Google wasn't that mainstream back then either. So what I'm curious about is, like, obviously there's a gap there now between 2002 and 2021. Where did you have to go and how did you get that thought process crystallized in your mind, Conor, that, this is the career for me. These are my reference points. I'm going to find a way by hook or by crook.
Yeah, I think the interesting point, and I think it's maybe a little bit this way with like becoming a player also, in terms of if you look at a Messi and a Ronaldo, like the starting point is the 2 young boys that were obsessed with football, and the determination and the dedication comes after the obsession or the love. And I think actually when I started coaching, it was a meeting of 2 loves in terms of the game of football, and then I quickly realized that I loved teaching, and that I've explained it before in terms of I didn't score too many goals now when I played, but when you score a goal, it's that ecstasy, isn't it? It's a kind of instant euphoric feeling, and yet it's very, very fleeting, almost almost gone instantly as well. Whereas teaching, when there's somebody there and they maybe couldn't execute something, and then you set out on a plan alongside them, and ultimately they do the work and they make the progress happen. But when you see them then executing something that they before were not able to do, it's not euphoria, it's not ecstasy, but I now have the reference points of seeing some of those kids 15, 16 years later, and it just brings a smile to your face when you see them. And it may not necessarily be that learning even took place, but just the building of relationships and that kind of sport brings people together, and then so that love of the sport, and then this kind of what now has turned out to be a profession of coaching, kind of parting of the waters a little bit. So in that first year, really, it wasn't about, like I said, a career. It was just perhaps I was fortunate in that there was some raw materials there that I was able to put to work before I'd educated myself, if you like. And then when you're hitting the wall in terms of trying to improve players, that's where it's like, well, where do I go to find a solution to that? And luckily around that time there was a lot of really good football teams playing, and still to this day I feel like that's the best reference point, watching the best teams play and learning from them, and the best coaches teams play and learning from them. And that's what it was at the beginning, and it was really, I always had this idea that when you're designing practices to try and replicate the game, right? I was never someone that was a big fan of drills, and dribbling around cones and stuff like this. It has its place, obviously. But yeah, I think there was maybe some innovation there from the beginning, and I really like to go back to it. I got lucky. The first group of players I coached were just wanted to learn. And that trust was there. There was maybe a 3 or 4 year age gap between me and them, and in some ways maybe that helped. And what I know now, 19, 20 years down the road, is that like that big brother, that like senior pro coaching is more powerful than the coaching, and now as a coach, you're almost trying to replicate within your teams that relationship that I would have had with that first team, if you like. So yeah, after a year, then it became, let's try and make this happen as a career, and it was literally do every course you can get on, buy every DVD you can buy. Like, I'm not quite as old as you hinted at. That like Google was in operation, and there was resources on the internet. Not quite like you go onto Twitter now and you'd have to come off it after 13 minutes. It's like information overload. So it's not like it was now, that's for sure. But like you've alluded to it in your own question, in terms of like, once that hunger and desire is there, it's just a matter of how, really, and you find out the how, because you kind of don't give up, like in terms of just trying to get better. And yeah, I'm still on that journey now. I still put on some sessions now that are probably worse than the ones I put on back then, so it's definitely not development's not linear, and you definitely feel that every day.
Yeah, I'll give you snakes and ladders. I don't think I can afford you Google, Conor. But
Yeah.
one thing you alluded to earlier on, it's very interesting. As a coach and as a player, right? As a player, you're always looking for that moment of ecstasy. So as a coach, what you say, you're enabling that player through the session design or the nature of a drill to create those moments of ecstasy for them. I mean, for a coach like yourself, as you said, who's been involved in a game at grassroots level, all the way up to first team level as you are now, that feeling of ecstasy for you as a coach, is that different between grassroots and the first team, or is it more similar than we're all led to believe?
Great question. No, I would say no. I for me, the only difference in the role I'm in now as a head coach of a professional team is the pressure. And the pressure is not what people think it is, in terms of getting fired or pressure from the fans. Of course, those are real things and they exist, but the pressure is, there's between staff and players about 50 families relying on the success of our football team, and I'm the one who's in charge of the direction we take at the start of every season, and for every day within that season. So that's the only difference, and like it's a significant one. But the difference in terms of like the process and the feelings that you get from day to day, I think both as a player and a coach are the same. And actually, sometimes like you have to remind yourself of that as a coach, because that external pressures that I mentioned can take over, and it never leads to success when those things take over. It leads to fear, and fear certainly is not normally a fantastic emotion in terms of producing, I think, elite level performance. So that's probably in my current role, my biggest challenge is making sure that kind of, and the fear with the grassroots kids, it was coming from the parents a lot of the time. The parents on the sidelines shouting, kick it to the fast forward or whatever, don't mind any of this playing out of the back nonsense. And like, so like, but the fear didn't really exist naturally in that young child. And that's probably a big part of the job here, is there's no parents, but there's the real pressures of the environment that we're in. And it's how to alleviate those pressures, because ultimately you want to tap into that child that fell in love with the game, that helped this now professional footballer master the game well enough to be a professional. And that's the challenge. So in many ways, I think, now you see a lot of top level coaches who, like me, started at the very, very beginning. And I think, yeah, it's about time and years and earning your stripes, but it's also in some ways they don't have the 20 years of being within the professional game like the ex-player. And And so the divide between maybe that young boy and that 40-year-old ex-pro, if you like, the divide is maybe a little bit bigger or longer, or what, you know, there's a bigger separation there. So no, I just think it's different pressures, and maybe different ways to try and build an environment that kind of alleviates that fear and pressure.
And then what I'm curious about too, Conor, is that transition you've made too from coaching to management. And I say that too because your role is quite multifaceted, right? You're not just a first team coach, you're also involved heavily within recruitment, within analysis, so on and so forth. I mean, what were the challenges along the way for yourself adapting that extra responsibility?
I think the big challenge when you do have a multifaceted position, the big challenge is clarity, is tackling each different task that you have with clarity, and because in all of those areas that you mentioned, you know, the CEO is the boss, the owner owns the club, the general manager runs the club day to day, but being kind of the head football person in the organization, you're the person that's kind of lent on for the vision in these different departments, whether it's recruiting or scouting or sports science or analytics or whatever it might be. So the important thing is being clear in what you think is the best for the club, and what the vision is. And, you know, sometimes in terms of like, after that, I think the steps, you can make wrong steps once you're clear in the initial vision, because you take wrong steps, you've always have that roadmap, if you like, of, you know, this is what we want for the football club, and this is why we want it. And the vision, I think, has to be connected to the landscape or the culture of wherever it is that you are. And then ultimately, as the driver, you need to believe in it. So when I made the decision to become the head coach here, it wasn't a very good financial decision. It was, in some respects, like, lots of people didn't understand my position, or the decision that I made. But I did, because I was here and I could tap into the culture and the promise that lives within Cambodian football. And many of the things that I saw, or the potential that I saw, there was an alignment there in the things that I kind of believe in. So I think that's the big thing. And we've made many mistakes along the way, but I think the one thing, now I'm in my fourth season, the one thing that I would be happy about is that the messages delivered on day one are the same messages, are the same beliefs, and ultimately they're about values and principles. And I think it's important that you know, every person has to evolve, the club has to evolve, but like, your principles and values, if they're correct, they don't really change over time.
Yeah, and it's one thing, I suppose, Conor, to speak about clarity, vision, and purpose. But it's another thing to kind of live it and reap the rewards, which you did, winning the league title in Cambodia. What was that process like, building a title-winning team, both on and off the pitch? Like,
well, I think the starting foundation for our particular league title was failure. In terms of 2018 was a complete disaster. I had 5 weeks to recruit a team, 5 weeks to get a team to the fitness levels that I needed to play the way that I wanted them to play. And I wanted them to play that way based on, you know, it was going to be a high pressing team. Why did I want that? I wanted that because, you know, the Cambodians, they're not big, strong footballers in general. But they're quick and they're technical, and so I wanted to play as far away from our own goals as possible. I felt they had the technical capacity to do that, and I felt that made sense because, you know, high balls were going to be an issue, for example. So kind of that's what we wanted to do. And I was like, well, can I get them fit enough to do that? Maybe not right away. Not without a proper preseason. Can I recruit the players that are going to help us do that? Maybe not right away. And then we had a riot in 2018. And it was an oversight for me in terms of I did a lot of homework in terms of how they played in the past, a lot of homework into kind of the characters of the players, etc., etc. I never thought of asking like about disciplinary issues or anything like that in the past. And from day one, they were so good with me. I didn't even imagine that it was ever an issue. But there had been disciplinary issues. There had been, I suppose, Russia blood to the head kind of moments in the past where they had incidents that leaded to bans. And my 7th game in charge, we'd win 1-2, drawn 2, lost 2. And in the 7th game, I won't go into the game, but basically we missed an open goal to go 2-1 ahead. They went down the other end, scored a deflected goal. Then there was a little bit of a coming together in the field, and that led to kind of a fight on the field. Our kitman ran onto the field. Their Japanese player punched our kitman. So, and that was the kind of that was the match really that lit the fire in terms of in Cambodian culture, like a foreigner to fight a local, that's an issue. A younger person to fight a more senior person, that's a massive issue. And so the stand emptied and the players went, and I was just stuck to my technical area, like thinking, what's happening here? And the aftermath of that meant half-season bans for like half my team. And it also meant me like sitting down with the board, if you like, and going like, what's this about? And like, luckily for me, because of the history that was there, I didn't get, none of the blame was attached to me in terms of disciplinary issues, but kind of the blank canvas of how do we rebuild from this was given to me. And then the pressure of winning was gone because we didn't have a team. So at the end of that 2018 season, the band players came back with 3 games to go. We won those 3 games, and there would have been a lot of pressure on me from the outside, but actually, because of the clarity we spoke about earlier, my relationship with the CEO and owner was very good, and I was able to sell to them what we were going to do. And then we put a team together. Basically, we got some people out that I felt we needed to get out, and we got some good characters in with our foreign players. And yeah, we went on a 33 game unbeaten run, which included the 3 games at the end of that season. And the last 2 games that we lost were the last day of the season when we had already lifted the league title. And heartbreakingly, we lost the cup final on penalties in a game that was that had plenty of incidents as well. So so yeah, it was like, you know, the foundation was the failure, and the room, if you like, that the failure gave everybody to go, well, let's learn this, what the coach is trying to teach us. Let's try it. There's no real pressure on us. And then kind of away from the spotlight, if you like, I think the players were beginning to see, to be fair to them, I think they could see at the very start what I wanted to do. Maybe not all of them, but a core of them. And the key was when the big bans came was, well, you know, I spoke about fear and pressure already. There was no fear, there was no pressure. And then they started really giving in to playing the way we wanted to play, and that gave us a lot of momentum in the preseason of 2019. And like I said, that momentum went on for 33 games. So it was great. It was really nice, you know, to just shake hands with the CEO at the end of that season and say thank you to the owner, because, you know, the pressure was on them really to relieve me of my duties, if you like, in 2018. But like they had kind of the strength of their own characters and the conviction really of their own vision in terms of, you know, we may as well do this now. you know, they knew a lot of the things we were doing and wanted to do had to be done. I'm not so sure they knew it was going to lead to success, you know, as quickly in the end as it came. But thankfully it did, you know.
Yeah. You know, patience tends to pay off, albeit, you know, mentioning patience and football in the same sentence doesn't really go hand in hand. But having spoken to you a few times already, Conor, before, I know you're a firm advocate of analysis, so much so that in fact you take a very hands-on approach with it. Just really interested and intrigued in terms of implementing that new style of play. I mean, what were some of the KPIs and some of the metrics you would have used to evaluate your team's progress and performance?
So, and this actually leads back again to the vision and clarity in terms of, you know, our KPIs I would have delivered in my interview with the CEO in terms of, you know, this is what I'm going to build, this is the style, etc. And this is a way for you to monitor the progress. Obviously, winning games is the most important way, and you never want to lose sight of that. But you can be winning games, and the KPIs would tell you it's not going to last forever. And equally, you can be losing games, but the KPIs will allude to the fact that, you know, you may be just missing an ingredient. So yeah, you know, I was lucky in terms of the CEO really bought into that, and, you know, being the CEO of our club's not his only position. He runs 5 or 6 businesses for our owner. So, you know, numbers are important, obviously, to people like that, and they like the idea of that. But at the same time, they won't just, like, you know, go along with it. Like, if you go after the game and you point towards certain KPIs, you can do that after every game, right? The key is to say from the outset, these are important to us because, and then you can't hide from that. You have to deliver that then. And ultimately, of course, if you don't win games, the KPIs won't keep you in your job for very long either. But yeah, look, like the KPIs that are important to us, as I said, is like we want to recover the ball as close to the opponent's goal as possible. So we look at metrics like ball recoveries in the attacking third. You know, the weather is a big factor here. So sometimes we do have to play at 3:30 and 35-degree plus heat. So, you know, we'd be happy with about 15 ball recoveries in the attacking third in that kind of heat. Our home games are played at 6 o'clock, which is a bit cooler, and we would target a 20 plus if we can. Then, you know, passes per defensive action is another one that we like in terms of, and we're very, very ambitious with that in terms of, like, we try to get nine. So that's on average allowing 9 passes or less that the opponent has before pressure is applied, or a defensive action is applied of some description. And like that's a really ambitious. If you look at Manchester City, I think it's slightly higher than that. But the reason we went for that is, you know, some fields here aren't great. Some teams here don't want to build up that much. Many do, but just for that reason, we wanted to be ambitious with that and say, you know, like I think we can press more maybe than some of the elite teams, and more frequently. Obviously, fitness is something that you need to do that, and I'm very lucky that throughout my time here, the club have allowed me to keep adding staff. We have a great sports scientist. We now have a great head of medical, great goalkeeping coach. So like we've been able to add to our staff all the time to make sure that we're able to deliver on these KPIs. We like to have 60 to 65% possession, and again, that's just so that, like, pressing high is easier because you have to do it less. The PPDA, like I just said, again, easier because you keep the ball more. Making sure that the ball is near the opponent's goal, it's an easier thing to dictate if you have the ball. deep completions, so that's receiving the ball 20 meters from the opponent's in line, and XG, and basically we just want to outscore our opponent on those two things. So when I say outscore and XG, it would be like 1.0 more than our opponent. So there are other KPIs that might be game specific. But the important thing to say, I guess, about our KPIs is we don't look after a game and go, you know, we didn't get 65% ball possession in this game, therefore, you know, failure. The KPIs are meant for us to look at over 30 games plus and see where we are. Do we look at it game by game? Sure, of course we do. Just so that we can start to maybe be proactive if we're lagging in particular areas, but they're not really meant to be. I'm not a fan of per 90 metrics. They can be used in the right, and look, the context is what's important when you talk about analytics and statistics. It's what context you're using it in, and are you aware of the full context? So, you know, there are fields here that we can't build up. So, you know, the counter pressing, if you like, metrics are more important in those games. There are teams we play who maybe use the ball extremely well, but don't press extremely well. The possession now becomes massively important. So yeah, so I think we try to have that balance of the vision and the clarity that I spoke about, but at the same time, like, we're not a slave to these KPIs. If we have to defend closer to our own goal to win the game, we'll do that. Ultimately, it's professional football, and we're trying to win football games. It's not about style, or it's not about like ideology or anything like that. It's about us being able to evaluate basically where we're at in relation to our overall long-term kind of plan.
Really interesting. I mean, what comes to mind is there's this chess player, very famous chess player called Magnus Carlsen, and he speaks about, he was asked before about his style of playing chess, and he was saying the only weakness a chess player has is a preference for any style of play. And it's really interesting to hear about that analytic and feedback loop with your game model, as if it informs your game model, which it does. But as you said, context is key. Having that ability to adapt and vary between the counter pressing, you know.
Like I think the best example of that from that I have seen on my travels is like Pep Guardiola, as we all know, is obsessed with build-up play. That's his own words. But when he got Ederson, he played long balls from the goal kick and put Aguero offside. And he's obsessed with build-up because he believes that he wants to be the protagonist in the game, because it means that he's control of his own destiny or his team's destiny. It also means he can control the numbers up the pitch, in terms of like they control where the free man is and where the extra man is. And ultimately where you're losing the ball more frequently is further from your goal, and therefore you can make more errors, let's say, before ultimately results in so you know, you could be forgiven, and there's, you know, coaches around the world. I mean, Guardiola has had his impact on world football. You go to the MLS, so many teams build up. You go to the A-League in Australia, so many teams build up. It's the two opposite sides of the world. But like, do they build up for the same reasons as Pep Guardiola? Do they build up in the same way? And is it more stylistic for them to be viewed upon in that way? Because if you like, not that Pep invented any of this, and he wouldn't say he did, but you know, a change has come in world football since that Barcelona team that he's coached. And I think that for me makes the point that you've just made, in terms of it is a means to an end, just like Mourinho's is. It's a means to an end. That there's opposite sides of the spectrum, and they're very different on so many different levels. But I do believe they're the exact same in terms of they just want to win. You know, and like it's the Bielsa thing, like in terms of like, I'm sure I'm going to misquote him, but like he's often asked why he doesn't change the way his teams play. And he's like, if you're going to teach something, you need to believe in it to the death, because your players need to believe that you believe it. And that would be another thing that I would say in terms of that's kind of where you need to be careful in terms of, you know, cutting the cloth accordingly. I think in the long term, sometimes if you cut the cloth accordingly game per game, then it can have an effect, I think, in the dressing room in terms of like, what does this guy actually believe in?
It's a psychological buy-in, really, isn't it?
Yeah, like, and to talk about Guardiola again, like he calls it a seduction. Now, I wouldn't go that far, but he calls it a seduction, and I think you can get the you know, the analogy behind that in terms of, and like there's definitely a truth to that in terms of like how you deliver the message is important, and if you absolutely believe it, like the worst salesman in the world can be a good salesman if he's got a brilliant product that he believes in. You know what I mean? Because it's hard to fake that natural, this is brilliant and these are the reasons why I think it's brilliant. People, I think, naturally buy into that, because especially when you spend every day with people, like you'd have to be a very good liar to get them to invest in something that you don't yourself believe in. And I think that's the big, like you mentioned, the difference between coaching and management. And I think that's it. You know, when you are a grassroots coach, it can be, we're working on combinations today. And, you know, combinations or whatever it might be are important regardless of style in many ways. So, you know, you can be in love with football, in love with coaching and deliver that message. But when you're a manager and ultimately it's about like delivering wins, because there's people's jobs and there's mortgages on the line, all the rest of it, I do think that like the psychological side comes into it massively.
And then, I mean, with all that being said, I mean, impart the style of play and the principles you've spoken about, I mean, over there in Cambodia, obviously I presume Cambodian isn't your first or second language, Conor, but, you know, is that more implicit within your session design?
Well, it's my second language now, and I think that speaks more to how poor I was at speaking Irish in school, what a bad student I was, and even worse student in secondary school at German. But it's my Khmer, the Cambodian language, is my second language now. Yeah, look, like the thing I would always say, and like the people that I've employed to come here and work with me are all English speakers. And the big thing that I often say to them when they're delivering sessions or part of the sessions is there can be a debrief sometimes with my coaches where I'm like, that's a great game. I remember doing that game so often and I know why you did it. You know, he was trying, let's say it's a sports scientist and he's playing rugby, for example, and he's doing it because he wants to get accelerations and decelerations into the players early in the session, or he might want to get sprints in, or maneuvers to beat an opponent without the difficulty of the ball mastery. So completely see why he's doing it, but then you have to, through translation, explain the rules of rugby to people who don't know the rules of rugby, right? So that's a big task. So yeah, in your session design, like language becomes a really big part of, I love that game and I've done that game lots in the past and it worked really well, but it doesn't and it won't work here. So you do have to think about that a lot. And then like the use of language as well, in terms of like, there's some things here where the players now use the English words because the football terminology doesn't really work in Khmer. You know, so Like in Khmer, like obviously if you're defending and you're going to say left or right or whatever, you speak in Khmer in that way, that's no problem. But like the simple things that we would have like in the English language, like shouting shoulders, for example, for that defender at the back post just to open up so that he doesn't get his body shape wrong. So quick, so sharp. But if you shouted the Khmer equivalent, it wouldn't mean that. So we've had to do that in my time here. There's Khmer words we use in certain situations, and there's English words, and then there's making sure that the non-Khmer speakers within the team understand those words as well. And like I would go along with football is its own kind of international language. You don't need to learn a lot. But again, going back to clarity, like, you know, there definitely are moments when you need to get messages across really quickly, particularly those on the field. And that's something we've had to develop, and it didn't come right away, and it came through error as trial and error. And we probably aren't 100% there yet on that one. We have players who may have been massive communicators in other teams that they were in, and there's a feeling that this is that they lose that when they come here, and they also lose it because when you talk about Cambodian football, the last generation of Cambodian footballers weren't professionals. So my 26, 27-year-olds are the first senior pros that ever existed in Cambodian football. And that's difficult because, you know, who led them? Amateurs led them. So the habits that they know aren't particularly the great habits. And the standards wouldn't have been high standards. So a lot of the 20, 21-year-olds that kind of I have brought up through the ranks now, I would be excited to see what they're like when they're 28, 29. Because, you know, their role models are a little bit better than the ones that preceded. So I do think that will improve things like language that you've just spoken about.
Really interesting too, that essentially, you know, those players are masters of their own destiny. They're writing themselves into legacy going forward, being the very first generation of professional footballers. And what we spoke about off camera, we were speaking about COVID here in Dubai and out in Cambodia, and, you know, what's the precedent for us as humans in relation to, you know, dealing with a pandemic. I suppose you don't know, you just do, and you see where that charts your progress. But then getting back to yourself, Conor, I mean, you've assumed a high degree of responsibility. You manage a group of players. Not only that, you manage your staff. You take, I mean, first lead there with the coaching, with the recruitment, with the analysis. I mean, who does Conor Nestor go to in terms of getting guidance or looks for in terms of mentors?
Well, I said there's two sides to that question. There's within my own life, which I think is actually maybe the most important element in terms of I didn't have those reference points, let's say, as a young player growing up. But for my job now, I had great reference points in terms of my dad growing up was a massive influence on me, and my older brother now, and my older brother, is in a management role in his line of work, and I think has much bigger pressures on him than I do. So he's a great person to go to, and my dad in terms of was a great leader by example in terms of in his work he would have had a management position as well, and I think how you carry yourself when you're in a leadership position is important. And when I spoke about 2018, I think maybe one of the things that we got right in hindsight is those of us in leadership positions, and there was more than just me. There was about 4 key people, and we didn't get too high, we didn't get too low, and there was a consistency there. And And I definitely think both my father and my brother would have been massive influences to me in that regard, in terms of it was just a good kind of, they're good characters that kind of had that in them. Professionally, I've been extremely fortunate in that when I went on my coaching journey, there was a man by the name of Noel O'Reilly, who was on my youth cert, who sadly has passed, but he was the assistant manager under Brian Kerr and all those underage international teams that did really well for Ireland in the 90s, won European Championships, came third in the world. I was lucky to have him on what's now a C license. And there was a local regional development officer by the name of Brian McCarthy, who went on actually to be Brian Kerr's video analyst in a time, when Google didn't exist, as you said yourself. So those were two people at the beginning, and like both of them were just incredible coaches, but also very given of their time. Also, I think visionary people in terms of they realized that Ireland needed a generation of coaches, and they put a lot of time into developing coaches themselves. They love working with players. I think that's what we all love the most, but they were real coach educators. And then towards the tail end of my time in Ireland, Niall Harrison and Colin O'Brien, I had on my B and A licenses, and Niall Harrison is one of the best coaches I've ever seen in an operation. And I've been lucky to go to many countries to watch high-profile coaches coach. And Colin O'Brien on my A license, like I was working, 15, 16 years already when I did my A license. And I thought I could do self-analysis quite well. But Colin was brilliant in terms of just dragging one or two more pieces of information from a kind of self-analysis perspective out of you than you would have got on your own, if that makes sense. And so I was really, really fortunate to have had good role models kind of from the beginning, really, on the coaching journey. And I haven't mentioned my mother. But I did read somewhere, I'm not sure if it was John Wooden or if I'm giving this quote to the wrong person, but like, you should parent like a coach and you should coach like a parent. And the first time I saw that, I really understood that in terms of, good parents. I think there's an element of guiding is the word that you used yourself earlier. And then good coaches, like when you think of a parent, you think of care. And I think that's the balancing act a little bit, in terms of like players, when they care about them, are certainly a lot more invested. And then there's that guidance role that you have is a lot easier, or certainly that the trust that's needed forms a lot quicker and stays a lot longer, I think.
That's an excellent answer, Conor. I mean, there's so much there to pick at, but at the end of the day, it's just vital, isn't it? Imperative to have that support network. I had, for example, Juan Delgado on the podcast recently, the Academy Director of Austin FC, who's produced World Cup winners for Valencia, for Villarreal. And he said to me off camera, that football to him, it's 90% social competence, 90% human relationships. He said the rest of it you can obtain from the internet. And he's so right. But in terms of, someone like yourself who's essentially dedicated your life to football, Conor, what do you do off the pitch to kind of switch off?
Oh, it's really difficult. I have to be honest. It was my girlfriend's birthday on Sunday just passed, and we had a top of the table clash here with the champions from last year. So we lost the league last season. On the last day of the season, we had to win our game. They had to lose theirs. They got a goal to draw on the 7th minute of stoppage time, and so we played them in our potential revenge match, let's say, on Sunday, and we lost to a last-minute goal. So you have to come back a day later, having missed missed your significant other's birthday party, and then she has to have her birthday party a day later because you can't be there, and you gotta put a brave face on it, haven't you? Because like, I think everybody knows the pressures of work-life balance, and I think that's difficult for everybody. And like, I've some mates that are doctors, and I'm all the time like, ask, how do you switch off? And did you do it when you went to university? Did they teach you how to do it? And the answer to that's no. But I know that those doctors, they're better at it than I am. And you know, that's definitely somewhere that where I need to try and develop over time. And unfortunately as well, I have one of those faces that you never have to ask me how I'm feeling. My face is telling you already, which is not particularly great actually for the job that I'm in. If my face could lie a little bit more, it would be good, I think. So yeah, it's really difficult, but I think it's difficult. Look, it comes back to caring, what I said in my last answer, and you can't. I don't know how to switch on and off that tap, and like, I know that we get successes because of that. So will I learn over time how to do that and get that work-life balance a little bit better? I'm not sure. I was in Melbourne before I came here, and I was going to do, you know, a coaching role that would have been less, wouldn't have the pressures that I have now, let's say. And Melbourne, I don't know if you've ever been. Melbourne is the best city I've ever been in work-life balance. It's not. It's life-work balance in Melbourne. It's and I think Australians are quite good at doing things that way. But I chose this job over that, which ultimately I think, you know, when you decide to do this job, I do think there probably is a little bit of a trade-off. And, you know, I think the book is Living on the Volcano.
Michael Calvin.
Right. Yeah, so it alludes to that, you know, and like, don't get me wrong, that I'm playing the world's smallest violin here. I wouldn't change it for the world, in terms of like, when you're winning, this is the best job, apart from being a footballer, the best job on the planet. And when you're losing, it's difficult, but you know, maybe it's difficult because you want it to be as well, in terms of it's not maybe even subconscious. You're like, consciously, you know, I have to feel this pain because this pain is also a driver. And the more successful people, you like, you know, you listen to a Roy Keane or whatever when he's on the TV now. And I remember the famous clip of Aston Villa celebrating when they stayed up they didn't get relegated, and they were celebrating in the dressing room, and the camera panned to Roy Keane in the studio, and like, Roy Keane can't turn that off about his personality now. He's not like, and it's got nothing to do with him, right? He's not connected to it in any way, shape, or form. Now, I'd love to think I'm a Roy Keane type character. I'm not. But I think there's a similarity there in terms of like, that switching off mechanism is not something that I've developed. But hopefully over time, you know, things get better when you try to develop them, and that's one that's definitely on my to-do list, I'd say, you know.
Yeah, but you know, in life too, you can't always relate, can you? I mean, when you've that tried and tested formula, that's, you know, in your own mind, that's given you and validated your success, you know, why mess with that? But in terms of, I mean, with so much on your plate at the moment, Conor, I mean, you're really living in the moment. Have you taken out time or considered, I mean, your future, going back to Ireland, Europe?
Yeah, I mean, the end of this season is my 4th season. I've been so fortunate here with my bosses, in terms of they've really bought into me and believed in me, and we're building a training ground at the moment. When I came here, there was a 10-year-old push lawnmower cutting the grass in the stadium, and it was kind of a microcosm for the job that was ahead, I think. but now we're building a state-of-the-art training ground for where we are in the world and for the league that we're playing in. And so I do want to walk away here when I feel like my job is done. But you are always conscious in the position that I'm in and the job that I'm in of, walking away before you're told to walk away. Advice from my brother is always like, leave when they want more. And like he's managed his career very well. And I think it's really good advice. But I suspect, like, I worked for the FAI for 9 years. My little plan and in my little black book was to stay for 3. But I stayed for 9 and is it a regret? No, because I think I developed a lot of the skills that I'm using now because I wanted to stay, because I had this feeling of not having done enough. I knew I gave everything I had, but together with all the people I worked with, I didn't feel we were accomplishing enough. In the end, I realized I could be there till I was 80, and that would be the feeling. And I think it goes back to what you said in terms of, like, it's about learning these things and developing as you go a little bit. And I do feel I've learned a lot of things from that FAI experience of, maybe the end of this season will be the time here. But I know that there'll be a conversation kind of between me and the owners, and it will be a situation where we feel that it's right for everybody. And if we feel it's right for all parties, then we'll do that kind of at the end of the season. Have I really thought about where next in terms of destination or type of club and stuff like that? No, not 100%, which I'm sure many people will probably think is naive. But I think what I bring to the table when I come somewhere is that you get the whole package and you get a complete investment. And when we press pause or stop or whatever it is here, I'm happy to do what I did when I left the FAI, and I took my time and I reviewed and tried to improve some weaknesses, and I think that's why we've had some success here, because I took the time to do that. Hopefully I'll get a lot more win bonuses between now and then, so I can afford to do that again. But no, that's kind of the way I see it. And I read once before that Tottenham decided to take Pochettino because when they wanted to speak with him, he was a little bit kind of like, I can't speak to you because I'm the Southampton coach. And I'm not sure where I read it, but it was like, he hadn't done a deep dive on Tottenham Football Club. He hadn't done a massive analysis on what he would do when he got there. His project that he did to get the job with Southampton. And that's kind of the way I look at this here in terms of, like, try and make the work you're doing your masterpiece, and those that are interested in that will be interested in it, and those that aren't won't. And we'll find out when everything's all over if I was right or not. I don't know if I'm right or not, but I just know that that's kind of how I'm wired. And a bit like you said in your question, it's kind of like, I think developing is really important, and like we have to be lifelong learners in the positions that we're in. But also you have to kind of be true to yourself, and you have to do what naturally works for you and kind of your own natural character. And I think that's probably the way I'll continue to do it, I would say.
Yeah, it seems to me, Conor, it's a journey that hasn't yet run its course, and it very much is a book I reckon people would buy if it was on the shelves, metaphorically speaking. But finally, to close, I mean, what advice for coaches would you have that are wishing to embark in a similar pathway to yourself?
Well, it's a great question. Like, I was 17, I wasn't thinking about being a pro coach. I was 18, I was obsessed with being a pro coach. I was probably obsessed with being a manager. And then what happened along the way was I forgot about being a manager and I just got busy trying to be a better coach. Another thing that happened along the way is I got to work with a guy called Tommy Barrett, who's the manager of Treaty United now in the second tier in Ireland. He's got the lowest budget in the second tier in Ireland, and they're second on the table because he's just an absolutely brilliant man manager. And you know, the 90% of the job, as you described it, is absolutely outstanding. And when I worked with Tommy as he's an assistant with Limerick FC, I was like, I don't want to be a manager. This is the best job in the world here. Tommy's doing all this managing of the egos and all the man management and all the rest of it. And I'm just being a coach, which is what I've spent years trying to master. So my advice to people a little bit would be like, that's what's worked for me in terms of getting lost a little bit on the journey, in terms of the obsessions changed in some ways over time. The obsession in the beginning was improving the young boys that I had. And I remember the motivating factor being, I didn't feel ready for my international under-15s trials. I wanted them, if they got them, to be ready. And obviously had enough of an ego as a 17-year-old to think that I was the man to fill the gap. But you know, that was the first journey. Then it was the ambition took over. The ambition threw itself away for getting lost in developing the tools, I guess. And I think ultimately, you know, I've ended up getting this job because I developed the tools more so than anything else, not because I wanted at 18 to be a manager. I think the most important part along that journey was the part where you got lost in the work and trying to be better at it. And I remember leaving a job in Ireland when I was 22. It was an okay job. I was a shipping agent after university. I became a shipping agent. I never became a teacher. And like, it was an okay job. It was at home with my family. I wanted to be at home at the time. And salary was good, no problems, easy. And I gave it up to get $220 a week out in the US because they would let me coach for about 1,000 hours in 9 months. And I couldn't get that as a volunteer in Ireland, even though I was coaching as many hours as I possibly could. So that's kind of my advice is just get lost in trying to get better. And I think the opportunities will come in the end when you do that, but you need to be patient. Like, you know, people, when I got the head coach job here, saying, God, you were so lucky. You're so lucky you were in the right place at the right time, which is 100% accurate, by the way, because I wasn't even meant to be staying. I just happened to be here waiting for a visa, my visa to come for Australia, that I was being given a 2-year sponsorship there. So it's true, I was in the right place at the right time. I was in the right place at the right time with 17, 18 years experience, a UFAA license, and having coached lots of young boys in a very rural part of Ireland to go into elite pro academies in England. So that's the bit that they should focus on. The luck kind of comes after all of that. And then, you know, if I was motivated by money, I wouldn't have taken this job. But now, this is a great thing about football. You know, big contracts will come if I start doing a better job, and the focus should be on doing a better job, right, or getting better at what I'm doing. And I think ultimately, like, as coaches, we should really be able to identify with that, because that's what we want from our players, isn't it? You know, that's what we want from them. And having delivered as a tutor, working for the FAI, so many foundation level coaching courses, that was often the bit that gripped me about the coaches on the coaching courses, that they weren't the same as students. You know, what they were like as students on these coaching courses was not what they were saying they wanted from their players. So you know, it's cyclical, really, the whole thing, when you like when you start on the journey.
Matthew McConaughey had a quote in his book, and it really struck me. Reminds me of your own journey, Conor. It's the target doesn't draw the arrow draws the arrow doesn't draw the target draws the arrow. But
Yeah.
it's been fascinating speaking with you, Conor, learning more about your journey over the past hour. And I'm sure many people are going to take so many lessons from this and derive many anecdotes from your own unique experience. But where's best for people to catch up with you on the socials?
Good question. Probably Twitter. I'm not even sure what my Twitter handle is, but hold on, let me check here. It's probably changed over the years.
Do they have that on Nokia phones?
Yeah. At Conor Nestor 17. There you go. That probably is the best, because I'm on all of them, but I probably go onto Twitter a bit more. Ironically, the one where you can type the least seems to be the one with the most information on it. But that's the world we're living in at the moment. That's the paradox of this technological age. But I'm not from that age, as you've mentioned already.
I think there's no better point to leave off the chat. But Conor, thank you so much for coming on. Really appreciate having the opportunity to speak with you. And yeah, hopefully sometime in the future we can get you on again.
Yeah, my pleasure, Conor. All the best.